Good afternoon, and welcome to the Indigenous Works webinar on Becoming Engaged, Indigenous Works with ICT. Indigenous Works is a not-for-profit ISCO certified organization with the mandate to improve the inclusion and engagement of Indigenous people in the Canadian economy. Since 1998, it has developed many tools and services designed to help companies and organizations improve their Indigenous recruitment and workplace inclusion strategies. We take an organizational development or an OD approach to Indigenous engagement and employment. We work with corporate Canada and Indigenous groups. With one foot in the corporate world and one foot in the Indigenous world, our ability to understand both corporate and Indigenous perspectives is what makes us different. Visit our website for more information at www.indigenousworks.ca. Today's webinar covers the business case for Indigenous employment, current situation of the ICT sector in Canada, the opportunity for Indigenous engagement and employment for the ICT sector, next steps for your engagement strategy. We'll begin this webinar by talking about the Indigenous engagement levels for the ICT sector. In a 2017 Indigenous Works survey, 85% of the organizations that participated had not prioritized Indigenous engagement in any way. The ICT sector was identified as one of the disengaged sectors, with a score of 9%. Together with advanced manufacturing, retail, hospitality, and transportation, which is also below the already low national score of 13%. By 2021, Canada will need to fill more ICT positions, making the effective and inclusive utilization of the local workforce a top priority. A low engagement score indicates few Indigenous partnerships and no meaningful plans to engage with Indigenous people. In 2015, the tech sector was directly responsible for $117 billion, or 7.1% of Canada's economic output, greater than the finance and insurance industries. 864,000 Canadians were employed in the tech sector, which made up 5.6% of Canada's total employment. Over 50% of employees had a university education, compared to 29% across Canada's labor force. This sector is focused on developing talent. It is said that by 2020, there will be 220,000 unfilled ICT jobs in Canada. According to Robert Watson, the President and Chief Executive Officer of ITAC, ICT is the driving force of the new economy, particularly digital economy, as every sector in business is going digital. He also says, you don't have to be sitting in an office to work on ICT. You can be anywhere in Canada. According to the Globe and Mail, for Canada's tech to thrive, startups must focus on growth plans instead of exit plans. They claim that companies are selling too fast, and there is a trend to create plans in order to be attractive to bigger companies and being bought out instead of focusing on local growth. Let's talk briefly about the Indigenous population in Canada. If you're interested in going deeper and learning more about history of Indigenous peoples in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and general strategies for engagement and employment, Indigenous Works has other webinars available on these topics. In particular, it is important that employers gain an understanding of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and what it means for them. The 2016 census shows that the Indigenous population has grown by 42.5% since 2006, which is more than 4 times the growth rate of the non-Indigenous population. The average age of the Indigenous population was 32.1 years in 2016, which was almost a decade younger than the non-Indigenous population. In 2016, more than 10,300 Indigenous peoples were employed in ICT jobs in Canada's digital economy. This is 1.2% of Indigenous peoples. 31.4% of all Indigenous ITC professionals in Canada are employed in the ICT sector. 47% of Indigenous ICT professionals are Métis, 2% are Inuit, 2% are from another Indigenous background, and 0.5% are from multiple Indigenous creeds. Indigenous ICT professionals are younger than the non-Indigenous ICT workforce. 8.2% of the Indigenous ICT workforce is between 15 to 24 years of age, and 29.3% is between 25 to 34 years of age. Women represent about 27% of the Indigenous ICT workforce. About 1/3 have a university degree at the bachelor level, and 36.9% possess a college diploma. As Indigenous people increasingly get post-secondary education and more lucrative jobs, that demographic moves further into the middle class. This means that their purchasing power has increased. There is a strong market for IT systems, software, and hardware among the many Indigenous businesses and organizations. In Canada, we have about 43,000 Indigenous people who are business owners, and there are some 6,000 Indigenous organizations. Increasingly, consumers are favoring organizations to behave in socially responsible ways. With reconciliation being such a hot topic, Indigenous inclusion and engagement is top of mind for many people. The Prime Minister said, "No relationship is more important to me and to Canada than the one with the Indigenous people." Therefore, when the federal provincial governments put out requests for proposals, there is increasingly an Indigenous involvement component included. Let's listen to Robert Watson's thoughts on the opportunity for Indigenous employment in the ICT sector. Robert Watson is ITAC's president and CEO and chairman at Bruce Telecom. He is a widely respected senior executive with over 35 years of experience in the Canadian technology industry. Robert Watson brings extensive experience in both the telecommunications and energy sectors, serving as CEO of SaskTel and the Bermuda Regulatory Authority, and he led the technology transformation as the CEO of Sask Power. Robert also serves as an independent director on a number of technology and nonprofit organizations and on the Dean's Council of the Ted Rogers School of Management.
Well, the ICT sector in Canada, we believe, is the driving sector for the new economy, particularly the digital economy, because every sector is going brand new. It's going digital. Artificial intelligence is coming in. Cybersecurity is essential. Every aspect is all going digital of all cases. And you don't have to be sitting in an office to be part of it. You can be almost anywhere in the world. So therefore, you can be anywhere in Canada. That's really our advantage with our sector, is that we can look for people to develop our products and services, to help work with governments, to help work with other companies, and you can be anywhere in Canada to help do that. So we believe that one of the prime areas that we can get new employment, particularly, is in the Indigenous area. Well, partnerships in every aspect of business is important today. You can't do it alone, whether you're a multi-billion-dollar operation or just a one-man operation. It's real important, though, to help the developing companies, and therefore the developing bands and councils, get together and work together. I mean, we're finding that all the time. There's a will, but there just doesn't seem to be a way. People just don't have the time. So one of the important factors there is there's better help, not only to help the bands and the councils to develop businesses, but also small business. They really just don't know how to partner. And therefore, that's the main aspect. There is a will there. I can tell you, with working with bands across Canada, and particularly in Saskatchewan when I lived there, there's a will, for sure, to develop new relationships. There just needs to be an assistance to help get there. We are particularly focused on developing talent for the ICT sector. It's said by 2020, there'll be as many as 220,000 unfilled ICT jobs in Canada. Unfilled. That's with all the employment going through now, all the education going now, everything like that. So therefore, if you think that it doesn't matter where in Canada you sit to do your job, really, therefore there's all kinds of opportunities. And in fact, we're finding that the institutions, the educational institutions, are well aware of that and are very well doing it. It's the companies that just don't have the mechanism. So you actually literally have to help them set themselves up. You have to help set themselves up with partnerships, contract partnerships, even how you do it, how you set it up, what are the first steps, what are metrics that you're looking for to develop in order to be successful. The information technology is now fundamental in every sector, in all parts of the world, geographically, sectoral, in other words, power industry, service industry, every part of it is essential. So therefore, any interest you may have as an individual, you're already part of the ICT thing. You only need to learn the technicalities of ICT, whether you want to be a business manager in the ICT sector, or you just want to be a programmer or an analytical person. It really doesn't matter. And so therefore, as I mentioned before, it really doesn't matter where in Canada you're sitting to do your job. And large corporations have found a very good way of having remote employment, very successful. So this is just prime to go to all the Indigenous communities across Canada and help set them up.
There is a continued concern over the lack of talent to meet the demand from this growing sector. The sector would benefit from a number of initiatives, including increasing participation from specific underrepresented groups, including women, people with disabilities, and First Nations and Indigenous people. The benefits of increased diversity and inclusion hold benefits such as increased revenue, productivity, adaptability, and financial performance. Meanwhile, First Nations and Indigenous people account for over 1.2% of employees. It's important to note that there are a few initiatives currently helping bridge the gap. The first one is a skills development initiative being developed by the First Nations Technology Council. This 5-year program will begin in 2018 and enable 1,000 First Nations youth aged 18 to 29 years to explore careers in technology and innovation. The second one is ITAC's Career Ready program, which offers a subsidy to hire students and may offer additional funding when hiring from underrepresented groups, including women, Indigenous students, recent immigrants, persons with disabilities, and first-year students. Remote jobs represent an opportunity for all Indigenous communities. Therefore, 2 things need to happen in order to increase Indigenous employment in ICTL. The first one is bridging the technology skills gap in the Indigenous population, and the second one is offering affordable, high-speed connectivity. The ICT sector needs to partner with Indigenous people and communities. In order to bring the right training programs, attraction awareness, mentoring support, and training, this is how you leverage the strengths, interests, and assets of Indigenous people who are fast adapters to technology. Kelly Lindsay, CEO and President of Indigenous Works, makes specific calls to action or asks to the ICT sector. He says, individually, we ask to develop plans to employ Indigenous people and do business with them. We make a wider appeal to leadership in the ITC sector to develop engagement plans with Indigenous people, businesses, and communities. To embrace the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report, especially call to action number 92, which is directed to employers. To employ Indigenous people, to include Indigenous IT vendors in your supply chain, we present the idea for Indigenous communities to become a source for innovation, to test IT systems in remote areas and become a beta group. In the words of Kelly Lindsay, President and CEO of Indigenous Works, when people are not engagement ready, it means they don't have enough knowledge. They don't understand the issues. They lack strategies and know-how, and maybe don't understand the business case. President and CEO Kelly Lindsay also said, if we address their lack of knowledge and understanding on the issue, and we arm them with the right strategies, we can get people more engagement ready. Then they're in a better position to actually start to formulate meaningful partnerships. The goal is to work towards the partnership strategies, but to really adapt them for different economic sectors, because we don't think that there are some unique features and differences. The goal is to work towards the partnership strategies, but also to really adapt them for different economic sectors, because we do think that there are some unique features and differences in needs in these sectors. According to Indigenous engagement experts, most companies want to do better, but don't know how to do it. They are afraid of making mistakes that could possibly affect their company's image negatively. Therefore, because of cultural nuances and systemic barriers, the application rate of engagement and inclusion policies has typically been very low. Here is a good example of cultural nuances by Sherman Kong, Business Development and Industry Engagement Manager at AMIC. If you get an Indigenous candidate and they don't have a firm handshake, or they don't make eye contact, or they don't really boast about themselves, it's not necessarily because of lack of confidence. In the Indigenous culture, those are seen as signs of respect. Our 7-stage inclusion continuum is the heart of our workplace system. It's a 7-stage roadmap to becoming an employer of choice and offering a roadmap to workplace inclusion and a way to benchmark your own Indigenous employment strategies and practices. We started stage 1 with an indifferent company, and by stage 7, we have a company where Indigenous inclusion is fully embraced as the cultural norm. We offer advisory services and will work with companies who are new to Indigenous employment in any of the following ways. Indigenous employment strategies. We develop and design Indigenous employment strategies, recruitment, advancement, and retention. Indigenous workplace inclusion. We do an assessment of your workplace. Baseline inclusion measurement using our 7-stage inclusion continuum. Cultural awareness training. We offer training customized to your needs. We have more in-depth advisory tools to offer. Indigenous Employment Systems Review. Indigenous Employment Systems Review, a comprehensive review to ensure that your employment practices are nuanced to Indigenous needs. Indigenous Workplace Barometer, staff interviews in a proprietary 9-point methodology is used to analyze the critical barriers you are encountering in your Indigenous employment efforts. We can help IT companies develop a multidimensional Indigenous engagement plan, which examines opportunities for Indigenous employment, supply chain, social investment, and community development through CSR. Here's a recap of today's webinar. The Indigenous population represents a growing talent pool. The time is right to recruit Indigenous talent. The ICT sector has an opportunity to greatly increase their Indigenous engagement and employee diversity. There are potential clients as well. There is a strong market for ICT systems, software, and hardware among the many Indigenous businesses. There are organizations such as Indigenous Works that can support you in your Indigenous engagement strategies and do it right, even when you are just getting started. We can help you with your Indigenous engagement strategies, employment strategies, and workplace inclusion efforts. Getting started is sometimes the hardest part. Equipping yourself with the right knowledge and familiarizing yourself with the Indigenous people, their history, and current landscape is a good foundation. Please feel free to contact us today to discuss your needs and hear more about how we can help. You can call us or email us. You can also visit our website at indigenousworks.ca for more information. We want to thank you for watching our webinar today. Miigwech.